My pleasure to introduce Bill Hurley to you. Bill is the president of PelaStar. We're going to hear today about their work trying to bring offshore wind, into the mix in Europe and beyond. And I always, we go through in our classes. I teach energy environment class. I teach, or Charlie Barnhart teaches. We have students guess at how many offshore wind installations there are in the United States, and people sort of go 100, 10, and then they eventually get down to the right number, which is 0. And so we're going to talk about this exciting technology, the potential is there, and what we can do with it. And so take it away, Bill.
Oh, great.
I'll do the lights.
Thanks, Andy. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today to bring you some stories and tell you a little bit about what I've learned in my experiences the past few years in the fascinating world of offshore wind energy. What's particularly amazing is that the experiences I've had seem to correlate directly with what the Institute for Energy Studies is doing here at Western Washington University. And the program, from what I know about it so far, just getting underway, seems to be a highly relevant and applicable set of studies, particularly given my experiences out in the world the past few years in the world of offshore renewable energy. So I was trained as a naval architect, marine engineer, had my bachelor's of engineering degree from University of Michigan, and have spent 30 just fantastic years in the marine industry working for this company, the Glosten Associates, consulting engineering firm in Seattle, Washington, doing unique problems, challenges in the marine industry, helping our clients as they face challenges as in the marine industry. A lot of commercial work, tugboats, barges, ferries, oceanographic research vessels. When I started at the company, we were 13 people, and we've grown now to 75, focusing on just innovative, one-of-a-kind projects. But 8 years ago, we started a quest to be involved in renewable energy. This was driven by the recognition that the world is choking from carbon, and we really need to get going on generating clean energy. And we also had a vision of the future of deep water floating wind turbines. Deep water so that they could be out over the horizon, out of the migration paths of the coastal birds and bats, over the view, out of sight, but also importantly, out harnessing the stronger winds further offshore. Our whole engineering world had been focused on floating structures, floating vessels, floating platforms. So for us, thinking about floating offshore wind, deep water offshore wind, seemed like a problem that we, as engineers, could solve. And engineers just get all fired up about solving problems that haven't been solved yet. It really is what gets our juices flowing and gets us motivated and excited, and in a nerdy sort of way, We're proud to be nerds. In fact, Glosten it's a fantastic company. Our average age of the staff is under 40, and we have a nerd club and all kinds of great fun things going on. But we also realized that someday in the future that there'd be a business opportunity in being involved in the offshore renewable energy. If we were there, we could be involved in the industry and get all kinds of great fun engineering to work on. So we borrowed from the oil and gas industry, spent our nights and weekends developing a floating foundation technology that from an engineering perspective we really thought was superior, and lo and behold, we got a ton of interest from the United Kingdom. The UK had just passed a law committing the government to reduce UK carbon emissions to just 20% of their 1990 emission levels by 2050. Just exhibiting great leadership on the world stage. They said, we're going to, it's going to cost us money, it's going to be expensive, but we're going to commit and we're going to lead the world into lowering carbon. They also see their North Sea oil reserves diminishing. Their coal plants are aging. They need to be closed. The Fukushima disaster in Japan placed a huge cloud over nuclear power facilities. And their large reliance on energy imports from unreliable and potentially unfriendly sources really got them nervous. They see themselves as an island nation surrounded by windy waters. I'm sorry, I got behind a slide. Excuse me. The Carbon Trust was formed by the UK government to help accelerate offshore wind development. They looked at new generations of foundations, one of the high-cost elements in offshore floating wind. We were one of 7 technologies they selected to help develop, and this all was back in 1999. The UK had developed lots of consenting and encouragement for offshore wind. However, they imposed on themselves a depth restriction of about 60 meters water depth, realizing the technology wasn't there to go deeper. Well, looking at this map of the UK, the green areas are all water depths greater than 60 meters. They were focused on the small gray area, and hence current technology was all developed around the shallow waters, 40 to 60 meters. So this somewhat constrained the technology. However, to reach their lofty goals, they realize now that they need to look at the deep waters. Remarkably, in 2011, we won an international competition for funding from the Energy Technologies Institute, whose mission is to invest in the development and demonstration of technologies to help the UK achieve its binding 2050 carbon reduction targets. They realized that, hey, if we're going to get this carbon reduction in 2050, we've got to start working on it now, because how are we going to get there? So the Energy Technologies Institute funded us to develop a full engineering package for a full-scale floating offshore wind demonstrator in UK waters. We just completed this $6 million engineering effort last summer, but in conjunction with this technology development, we were expected to get this demonstrator in the water. Well, the technology opened the door for us, got us all excited. You know, we went running off to Europe to work on the technology, engaged international partners, and we walked briskly through this open door, ready to solve the world's energy problems. Well, what we found on the other side was a whole new set of challenges that had little to do with engineering and much to do with developing a new technology in a new developing industry. So we went over there with our technology and soon encountered a whole raft of issues that we had to deal with, and it became a whole new realm for us. First, there was the giant boulder of government policy and the political landscape of energy subsidies coupled with the mandate for economic recovery through job creation, a whole mixture of government incentives. Then the steep climb of developing a realistic and credible business case that would attract investors and financing to make a risky investment and install this giant floating wind turbine, an unproven technology, for a skeptical long-term reward. The slippery slope of justifying the economics. Why do we look expensive today, but how can we justify that our future cost of energy in 2030, 2040, 2050 will reach today's cost of energy generated from fossil fuels, and hence why would this technology be important to the UK? Then, of course, the delicate lace of adding machines, and these are big machines, to the sensitive ocean environment. Besides minimizing environmental impacts, we had to fit in among existing rules, competing interests, agreements, constituencies, constraints. shipping and navigation channels, fishing grounds, social impacts, military and aviation activities, radar interference. That's just to name a few. And we also encountered the hard pavement of a technology development race. We had chosen a winning technology, but we had to solve some technology challenges to make it cost competitive. And each side of this hard road we're racing on was full of blackberry bushes, full of competitors, because we were not the only ones that had this great idea. So soon our confidence, engineering, exuberance faded, and we felt more like Frodo with his ring trying to get to the top of Mount Doom. One new challenge after another, but there we were, quickly learning on the job, wishing we had a degree from Western Washington in energy studies. Because each of these areas of studies, can be a degree all themselves. But what we found was it's really important to understand the basics of each of them in order to work effectively in the energy industry. Each are interdependent on each other, and each have wide overlaps, and understanding and knowledge of a little bit in each of these areas is really important. So now I'd like to tell you about this journey, just a brief snapshot of what we encountered in each of these areas. So starting with government policy. The UK government's really keen on developing their offshore wind development. First off, they provide subsidies. They don't like to refer to it as subsidies, but it truly is a subsidy to stimulate the development of offshore wind, to get the industry moving. They have these renewable obligation certificates to offshore wind power generation, where the offshore wind power producer can get up to 3 times the utility power rate. They're trying to encourage the new technology development also, and encourage floating wind by reducing lease rates for demonstration projects. The government leases the seabed to the offshore wind developer, much like they've leased their North Sea oil mineral rights to oil companies. However, we're trying to install a commercial demonstrator which needs to be financially viable and produce enough power to pay for the cost of building, owning, and operating it. The one site we're focused on is off of Cornwall in the southeast UK, and this is a wave energy demonstration site, and it's called Wave Hub, that the UK government invested £50 million in a number of years ago to be a test center for wave energy devices. Well, we've gone through the consenting or the permitting process to get our wind turbine demonstration project installed there. The challenge is that we need more than the 2 rocks that the government's offering. We need more like the 5 rocks that they're giving wave and tidal devices at the moment. So we are faced with confronting the Department of Energy and Climate Change, the UK's Department of Energy, and appealing for more subsidy. And again, why would we want to subsidize your technology? Tell us why this is good for the future of the UK and all of the technology issues associated with it. Hence, we face this giant boulder of government with our small chisel and just start chiseling away at it. But it's a big, hard-to-move rock. Scotland, still part of the UK, almost became independent, have their independent thinking and are surrounded by deep water and have taken it upon themselves to offer 3.5 rocks to floating wind. Their dream is to generate so much energy, more than they can use, and sell it to their southern cousins in England. They have a lot of pride up there, a lot of determination. They've streamlined the permitting and the consenting process. And they're developing this, the 3.5 rocks has already attracted one of our competitors, Statoil's Hywind floating spar concept, to set up a pilot program off of the coast of Scotland, where they're planning to install 5 floating wind turbines. They're a Norwegian company, fueled by the Norwegian oil industry, and have lots of money to spend. And they're doing this entire pilot program of 5 turbines to simply test out how much is it really going to cost to install these turbines. At the same time, Scotland is developing its own floating wind energy test site off the very north part of Scotland at the offshore of a decommissioned nuclear power plant. One of the big constraints for offshore wind is the grid. You know, you generate all this power, you come ashore, what are you going to tie into? Well, an existing grid infrastructure is really important. And because they had this, this nuclear power generation facility, the grid, the green lines that you see on the chart there, is in place, ready to deliver power to the south. So let me just back up just a few more comments on policy and on government. Back before the economic crisis, back before 2007, everything was rosy. The government said, we're going to invest in offshore wind because we have to reduce our carbon. This is for the future, and everybody was on board. Well, after the economic crisis, the whole tone changed and said, we're going to subsidize offshore wind because it's going to bring jobs and economic recovery for the UK. And they kind of, the politicians set aside the whole argument about carbon reduction. So now we're faced with, yes, we'll sponsor you in Scotland, but you have to build your foundation in Scotland to create jobs. But we're trying to get the low cost of energy, and the cheap foundations are found in Eastern Europe. So how can we want to build the foundations in Eastern Europe, but we can't, and it's going to cost more, but we need jobs. So the whole policy and politics has gotten all confused, and it's all driven by the economic climate and the will of the people. Last winter, as electricity rates were going up, renewable energy got the blame. And a lot of people said, you know, it's either, I need to either eat or heat. That was the big saying around London, that people couldn't afford the high electricity prices, and they are about 3 times what they are here. So it's a large problem, and what's challenging is that the meaning of the subsidies change their reason for being based on the economic environment around us. What we need is a new robust economy behind us again, so that people can afford to pay for renewable energy, and that it'll be much easier for them to realize that we do have to save the planet. Anyhow, it's a great mix of politics, leadership, and political will. So on to business and investment. So we get faced with these questions. You know, we need to raise some money for the demonstration project, and people ask, why would I invest in offshore wind? What are you trying to do? How much money do you need? You need that much money? And then it's, what's the market? And everything looks risky, and it's never been done before, and who's going to insure it? And you know, there we are standing with our calculators in our hand as engineers saying it's a great technology, but it doesn't matter if you can't get a business case behind it and get financing and banks to believe in you and attract that investment. So it's challenging because the returns on our Glosten Associates spun out this company PelaStar to take the technology forward, to find investment, to in the future be deliver the foundations through contract manufacturing from shipyards, deliver the high technology tendons. But revenues from that business venture won't come in until 2022. So it's really tough to get investment today for revenues that don't come in that long. So, but we, having run a small business, we knew the basic elements of business and generated the business case and financial models. Maybe focusing just on the market side of business. There has to be a market for a business to be successful. So let's get back up and come back to the US for a minute. US has great offshore wind resources. As Andy mentioned earlier, of course, we have 0 offshore wind turbines at the moment, but there's lots of focus and energy and interest behind it, and they'll be coming. So we've got lots of wind. We've got population centers on the coast. You take the two of these, put them together, and you've got some very ripe areas for offshore wind energy. Let me just back up. Well, also want to make the point that 2/3 of offshore wind resources in the U.S. is in deep water, is in waters greater than 60 meters. The first ones will be in shallow water. You may have heard of Cape Wind off of Boston, off of Cape Cod. But the real energy is out there in the deeper waters. Also, it's important to look at the U.S. electricity prices. We have the resources in the offshore wind near the population centers. That's the supply, but the demand has to be high electricity prices. This I just clipped out of my Seattle City Light newsletter the other day because it was a nice synopsis. And San Francisco, Los Angeles are up there around 13 cents a kilowatt hour. Boston and New York's really high, 23 cents a kilowatt hour. So you need to have the demand present also. And here the demand is matching the supply. So economics is really kind of the I'm sorry, check on time. Oh, doing good. Economics is one area I'd like to just dive into a little bit. I know most of you may be more interested in environmental impacts, but economics is really important. There are three basic cost components of a wind farm. And we're talking just about costs now. The first cost is development expenses. Somebody needs to pay the up to $20–30 million worth of development expenses that take the project from an idea all the way through to getting ready to sign a construction contract. And the biggest costs, of course, are bird surveys, environmental assessments, wind surveys. You have to do enough understanding of the wind characteristics in order to feed the economic models, to get the financing in place, getting the whole bank's system set up, getting the whole financial models in place, getting the leases from the government. I mean, it's a huge amount of work. And it's very expensive, takes lots of expensive consulting. And the developers, I mean, this is their job. They relish the idea of putting this giant deal together. They put it all together, finance up front the $20–30 million it takes to do this, and then basically sell the project off to the energy company. Say, we've developed this project, here it is, it's ready for you to take. The next set of costs is the CapEx, the capital cost. And this is a little bit more obvious. It's just the total cost of building and installing a wind farm. And these, as you probably have heard, these 600 megawatt wind farms are in the $1.2–1.5 billion range. So it's a big capital expenditure. The financing's been set up during development, but basically you have to have enough capital to execute the project and carry it through to commissioning and start of power production. Then your expenses aren't over. They totally change character and become into operations and maintenance. And there's an annual cost of operating and maintaining this power plant, keeping it alive, keeping it producing power as efficiently as possible. Lots of boats running technicians out back and forth, helicopters for emergencies, major overhauls, planned maintenance. And importantly, today the world has to plan for the decommissioning of that wind farm in the future. So they have to basically set aside an escrow account to cover the costs of decommissioning the entire wind farm when it's all done. And it all has to be done in an environmentally conscious way. So those are the costs. And let me, there's a very simple formula, simple at face value anyway, for the cost of energy. Everything gets measured based on the cost of energy, which is the average annual cost divided by the net energy production. So it seems simple, and the cost is measured in dollars per megawatt hour. Dollars spent in a year over the megawatt hours produced in that year. That gives you the cost of producing the energy, which you can then compare to what you can sell the energy for, what the market is, how much subsidy you need. So the lower you can get your cost of energy, the more competitive you are, the better your technology is, the better the economics work, the more encouragement you can get, the better financing you can get. Economics is really at the center of the whole industry. So diving into it just a little bit, the average annual cost, the numerator, obviously you want to decrease that as much as possible. That is, has to do with the CapEx we talked about and the OpEx for the average annual operating expenses. But most importantly, or very importantly, is the cost of financing, the cost of money that it takes to build your project. The riskier the project, the more return the financer is going to want to get, and the higher the cost is involved on an annual basis. It's pretty much equated to getting your mortgage on a house. You sign up for an interest rate. Interest rates can fluctuate, and if it's a risky project, the interest rate's going to be higher. If it's low risk, it's going to be much lower. Land-based wind farms are down around 4% financing now, really competitive, really easy to get financing. Offshore wind is up around 10, 12%, and floating wind is, we were getting numbers back around 15%, so it makes it really expensive. The key is to get in there and get the technology demonstrated and show and reduce the risks. The cost of financing comes down, the whole cost comes down in the future. So the other advantage to this formula is we also have the opportunity to increase the denominator, bringing the total cost of energy down, the net energy production. And this is an interesting aspect because it's the rated power of the turbines times its efficiency, times the availability, and times the capacity factor. And just getting into some of those terms briefly, the rated power can be achieved by just installing more turbines, but fewer numbers of turbines, bigger turbines is always better. They call it more power per tower because you have fewer out there, fewer installation costs, and you can generate more power from a single unit. So the whole trend is to get to fewer, larger turbines offshore. The big cost is installing them, and if you have fewer to install, you can really cut down you can increase your rated power while you're controlling your cost in the numerator. Turbine efficiencies are increasing as technology is increasing. It's a huge undertaking by the turbine manufacturers. And turbine availability is how often is the turbine functional? Regardless of whether the wind's blowing or not, is it working? Or is it broken down? Has a circuit breaker tripped? Is it not functioning? Does it need technicians to get out there to repair it? So availability can increase. You can keep the turbine functional all the time with improved maintenance, improved access. So often the turbine breaks in high winds and the technicians can't get out there because it's way too rough. So they sit there for days while the turbine's not operating. If they could get out there more quickly, more easily, they could get the turbine back online, increase its availability. They could take a helicopter, but the helicopter is expensive, so you have to weigh the cost of the maintenance versus the availability increase that you get. And it's a great economic play on factors there. Subject of great study over in Europe. The other, okay, so that was availability. Now let's talk about capacity factor. So capacity factor is the net power as compared to the rated power, and it basically, in a nutshell, is how often does the wind blow? Of course, if the wind's not blowing, turbine's not generating power. However, it's also not only how often does the wind blow, but how consistent is the wind. And what's been found is that the superior wind resources are really the wind resources where the wind's blowing on a more consistent basis. It might not be blowing hard all the time, but more consistently, and those become the superior wind resources. And without the depth constraint, you have more freedom to go out and find those consistent, strong wind resources to really increase your capacity factor, which directly impacts the amount of power produced, which lowers your cost of energy. It's a really fun economic trade-off. So now we have the basics of wind farm economics. Now we need to take our technology, forecast it out to the future, and come up with industrialization plans. We look at learning curves for each of the components of the technology, from the foundations. And once shipyard starts building foundations, if they build it in serial production, really streamline the production, the manufacturing, gets all into industrialization models and manufacturing. And our Boeing is kind of a prime example of how they can produce an airplane a day down in Renton at the complexity that they do. They've just streamlined every single aspect of mass production. We have tendon technology developing, and connectors and anchors, and we look at every one of those components, apply an industrialization learning curve to them, and then look out and forecast what our cost of energy for our technology will be in the UK over the long term. And this is the key. You can see up at the top up here is the current cost of wind energy up here. I'm afraid battery's dead. Not too good for an energy studies talk, but today the offshore wind cost is up there. In 2020, after 25 units are installed, for instance, and this can apply to most any technology. We have a band of, these are sensitivity bands. The green shows the sites, the potential for the different wind sites in the UK. If we get a really good site, we can get down below 100 pounds per megawatt hour. We show the current cost of nuclear energy in the UK and a projected cost of coal in the UK at the moment, obviously rising as the social cost comes in there and new coal plants need to be built. Fortunately, they're not going to be building any new coal plants in the UK, which is just great. But in any event, it shows how we can bring renewable energy from offshore wind in future years down to great low competitive prices. So let's move on a little bit to environment. There are a few different aspects to environment. One is just the management of the marine, the strain on the marine resources. And taking the UK, for example, the Crown Estate is responsible for managing the resources of the seabed, of the ocean, of the seas around the UK. Out to the blue line is their 12-mile nautical limit, which they have complete control over. And then they have going out 200 miles, or until they run into another country, like Ireland. They divide down the middle for the economic zone, which they have economic control over all mineral rights, and basically they own the energy from the wind at that in their offshore. Some of the purple squares are some of the wind farms that have been sited, and the hash marks are the wind area zones that they've established after extensive study of wind resources, seabed, staying out of navigation challenges, getting the fishing industry to agree to put sites there, and of course the depth constraint of 60 60 meters. Just shows a little bit of the complexity involved in managing the ocean resource. They have a huge models that run all of these things together, and it's just fascinating what they do. Great area of study and research, by the way. So the environmental goals, of course, minimize initial impact, but we're really looking well beyond impacting the ocean. We're looking to ways to enhance the ecosystem, to use offshore wind farms to actually build the marine ecosystem, to make it fish-friendly, to attract fish, to attract marine growth, and to really enhance the marine ecosystem with new habitats. And things that are happening make it really plausible and possible for that to happen. We put a structure in the water below the surface of the water, and algae grows on it, and suddenly fish start coming over there, and fishermen don't want to be excluded. They want to be near those structures because there's more habitat there. This shows kind of one of the big areas of concern is minimizing the impact on the environmental impact on the seabed, which is really a whole protected area. The environmental agencies in the UK are very sensitive about disturbing the seabed because it is its own ecosystem. The different kinds of floating foundations, ours is upper left up there with our tension leg platform with our tendons going vertically, really do minimize the impact on the seabed. And then where some of the other concepts with long catenary anchor lines going out from each turbine, the turbine moves around so the anchors scour the seabed continually. Plus they have power cables trenched into the seabed that they also have to worry about avoiding. So a real important area is to work to minimize that impact on the seabed. So I'm getting back to technology. Technology is still on the bottom. Technology is the door opener to renewable energy in many respects. At least in our marine systems, we've seen it in solar as well. The more you can reduce cost of the technology and find new ways to do things. It does open up these other doors, but it's only 1/5 of the important puzzle. So I'd like to kind of close with some of the technology aspects. The current cost of energy, as we saw in the earlier plot, really is too high. They gradually, wind energy in the UK and in Europe and Denmark has migrated from being land-based into shallow water, less than 30 meters with monopile structures. Today they're moving out to the transitional water depths of 30 to 60 meters using jacket structures. And then in the long term, we'll move out to deep water greater than 60 meters with floating foundations. So the current practice of offshore construction is really expensive. This is just some views of a wind farm installation. They've been building these new jack-up vessels to stabilize themselves and jack up next to a wind farm so they can be stationary enough to lift the delicate blades and nacelles up and basically stick build the wind turbine by wind turbine offshore with day rates on some of these vessels that are upwards of $250,000 a day to charter one of these vessels. Then the storm comes up and they go into port, wait out a storm for a week, and it gets really expensive fast. So it's really tough doing this offshore construction. There's a picture of some of the new jacket foundations that are being built for the deeper waters. Complex structures, large structures. Here's a little picture of one of our partners, Alstom Wind, has developed a new offshore wind turbine. This wind turbine is a 6 megawatt turbine They call their halyard 150. The blades are 150 meters, or the diameter is 150 meters with 75-meter long blades. And they built their one prototype. You can see the one, this guy, on shore, right next to a river in France, because the components are way too large to transport over land. And they never, this is the only one that'll ever be installed on land. The rest will all be offshore because, and it was designed for the offshore environment. The second turbine, this series of photographs, they built a jacket. They loaded the jacket on a barge, took it off the coast of Belgium, installed the jacket. This is one of these big jack-up ships, offshore turbine installation vessels, TIVs they call them. And they've built about 20 of these ships over in Europe. Built them in Korea, brought them to Europe, all to just feed this the growing offshore wind industry. And after a number of delays, weather delays, they ended up finally getting their second turbine on top of the jacket off of Belgium. Alstom financed this entire project themselves just to demonstrate their new wind turbine so that they could get project certification. And they've since built a new industrial fabrication plant in France and are ready to build these by the hundreds, thousands. So the amount of investment a company makes just to get their technology proven is just kind of an example of what the confidence that industry has in offshore renewable wind in the future. But boy, the amount of money they put into doing that is just phenomenal. So a little bit about our tension leg platform technology. The turbines are big offshore, these 6-megawatt turbines. The top of the hub, the center of the hub is 100 meters off the water surface. Our technology is a tension leg platform, so the buoyant hull pulls up against these tendons under tension. And it's really designed to be a turbine-friendly platform. It doesn't heave it doesn't pitch and roll. It stays in a common plane and will just move back and forth. I often liken it to a chandelier hanging upside down, with its supports in tension. And it doesn't tip, it just moves around gently in a surge motion. It also has minimal footprint, and the big advantage of floating wind is that you can do all your assembly dockside. You can put the turbine on it, do pre-commissioning, plug it into the shore, spin the turbine, get everything checked out before you go offshore. You take it offshore, hook it to the anchors in a couple of days' effort, and really minimize that offshore construction time. So the cost of float, there's huge potential in the cost reduction afforded by offshore floating wind. So I talked a little bit earlier about our technology race, and I'll just have a few quick slides. I'm just going to blast through these quickly, but it's a technology readiness race. There's standards, technology readiness levels. This is one standard from our U.S. Department of Energy. And the quicker you can get up the scale, the better you are at reaching that goal of being commercialized. So our next step is technology demonstration, where we want to get an intermediate scale or even full scale prototype. We're going to jump over the prototype scale and go right to full scale to try and catch up with some of our competition. So our technology, thanks to our sponsored work, is ready for demonstration. We've got drawings ready to build, shipyard bids in, contracts. We just have to get through the political, economic, and environmental hurdles. For us engineers, the technology part was relatively easy. We knew how to do that. Real quickly, we're not the only ones with this great idea. We've got some intense competition for floating offshore wind. WindFloat, Principal Power, is based right in Seattle. They have a demonstrator off of the coast of Portugal already. Norwegian, going from left to right, there's the French Ideal, the Spanish Iberdrola, and the French VertiWind concept, a vertical axis turbine using French technology. Here Here's a concept, Windsea, that's fairly strong. They're a Swedish concept where they put multiple turbines on one platform to try and economize there. And Nautica Power is a US-based two-bladed wind turbine that has received some Department of Energy funding. So anyhow, it's a great race to be in, but it's pretty exciting. You know, we love competition, but it's a real challenge to try and beat these guys, beat these guys in technology and stay ahead of them. Last slide. I do want to just stress the importance of industry partners. We've been fortunate enough to assemble a great international team of industry partners. We're developing new tendon technology, synthetic fiber ropes from the company that makes Dyneema ropes, for those of you sailors in the crowd. DSM's a Dutch company, Dutch chemical company, developing new fibers. FiberMax is another Dutch company that does parallel wound construction and builds these tendons for us. We have an installation partner, a Belgium company, GOC, part of a big dredging company, industrial giant that builds these turbines, installation vessels, and is committed to floating wind. And then our turbine partner, Alstom, has been great to work with over the past years. We're mating their technology to the floating platform and doing all of the interface engineering with them. Anchors are important. We have a UK company, large diameter drilling, LDD, that drills giant holes in the seabed to install monopiles and anchor structures. And then, of course, the whole thing has to be certified by a class agency, Det Norske Veritas in Norway. So just a bit of supply chain talk from I know that the business school talks a lot about supply chain economics. Another key piece of technology in the offshore wind industry. Thanks for your great attention. I've got, I'm sorry to talk so long, but I think we have some time for some questions. Andy? Is that,
Indeed, yeah, please. Thank you very much, Bill.
Yeah.
So you can ask questions, Bill, if you wouldn't mind repeating it for everyone else.
Yeah, sure will.
So I can imagine these things are pretty heavy. What is it on the under the water that makes them float? Like what's down there that is so buoyant that it can support the whole turbine?
Yeah, the question is the turbines are heavy. What makes them float to support the whole turbine? Well, the turbine itself is not that heavy. It's the nacelles about 300 tons. The tower's another 400 tons. And the power of buoyancy, you know, is really amazing. Our little hull down there is plenty to keep a lot of tension in the tendons. It's just an empty volume of a hull. Yes, basically like a ship's hull out there carrying heavy weights. Yeah. Yes, you were next. Yeah.
You mentioned financing. Where does your firm get their financing?
Well, fortunately, our firm has been very profitable over the past few years, and the Glosten Engineering Company has dedicated part of its profits to this new endeavor.
So you've been able to do it internally then, it sounds like.
So far, we've been able to do all this internally. Yeah. But it's clear that now the mountain is too big and we need help. Yes?
How have they been engineered to withstand like extreme wind and waves and offshore storms?
Yeah, good question on how has the platforms been engineered to withstand offshore wind and waves and storms, and that is the essence of what we do as naval architects, marine engineers, and offshore engineers, where models are built, all the wave impact forces and energies captured. We look at the 50-year return period storm and design to that storm level, plus a myriad of other load cases. A lot of this comes from the oil and gas industry with offshore floating structures for oil and gas drilling. And so a lot of those techniques have been well established, but it takes a lot of analysis and engineering to do that. Yeah.
So I know they make wind turbines up to, rated up to 8 megawatts. So what's the limiting factor with offshore wind in terms of, like, given there's demand having a higher rated capacity, what's the limiting factor? Do you see that changing in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was about what is the limiting factor on the size of offshore wind turbines. You mentioned that there's some 8 megawatt turbines out there, and there are, and the push is to continually get more power into a turbine. The limiting factor is when the cost of the foundation and the installation exceeds the revenue generated from having one 10 megawatt turbine instead of 2 5s. There is a point when it can be too big, and that's been the study of the focus of a lot of study. Some studies have said that the optimum turbine size is 9.5 megawatts. Siemens, one of the big turbine manufacturers, in fact the biggest in the world today, has a 10 megawatt offshore wind turbine on the drawing board that they're developing. At the same time, there's new technologies to keep the size and the weight of those offshore wind turbines small, and American Superconductor Company here in the US is looking at cryogenically cooled superconducting generators. So it can have the weight of a 6 megawatt turbine but produce 10 megawatts of power. So there's all of that technology development going too. Yeah.
Kind of like hydroelectric generation, where there's when they really supply depending on when there's a demand. And is there any talk or technologies developing in the way to manage the supply and demand of the use of this energy? Because it seems like winds are always blowing, or is there a switch when the generators are turned on, or kind of the operational stuff behind this?
No, that's a great question having to do with the intermittent supply of the wind energy. And the big focus and a lot of work is going into storing the energy when the wind is blowing but everybody's asleep and the air conditioning's off. Because the energy has to go someplace. Occasionally, even in Western Washington, they've had to just feather the blades and not absorb the wind because there wasn't enough demand for it. But nobody wants to see that because they're trying to get money to pay for the cost of building the wind farm, and if it's not spinning, they're not getting any revenue. So a lot of effort is going into energy storage, and you've heard about the smart grid systems that they're trying to develop where if the wind is blowing, they can throttle down the other power plants and redirect the power to areas that do have consumption. So it's an important problem to deal with the supply of power, the surge, and storage. Yeah.
You probably, or may have already asked or answered this, but is there a maximum depth for where your turbines can go?
Oh, you guys have great questions. He asked, is there a maximum depth? We've looked at it a depth up to 200 meters. And at some point, just like the turbines, there is a depth when it's not going to be economical anymore to install them. There's a lot of interest in Hawaii where the depths are up to 1,000 meters, but the wind is great and the power prices are super high. So they've been toying with the idea of offshore wind in Hawaii. But it's a great question still to be determined.
Can I follow that up with
Yeah.
It is an economic limit that limits it from going out further, not a physical or a
Yes, it is. He asked if it's an economical or physical limit. The oil and gas industry has tension leg platforms installed in, I believe, like 4,000 meters of water depth for oil and gas drilling. Unfortunately, they can make it worthwhile because they can make so much money off of the oil that it produces. But technology-wise, it's no limit, but there will be a... Offshore wind is you know, we're a poor industry. We don't have a lot of money to spend. Yes?
Does most of the generation also take place at night like it does onshore, or how does that change?
He asked if most of the generation takes place at night or not, and it depends on the site and what the wind characteristics are of the site. So if the wind's blowing at night, like it oftentimes comes up on land at nighttime. Offshore, the great thing about it is it's kind of windy all the time. Yeah, pretty constant.
Let's thank Bill, and if anyone has anything else to add, we can come down and Bill can hang around for a few minutes. Thank you very
Great,
much.
yeah, thanks everybody.
And Bill, we would like
Oh.
to present you with this very special Western Washington University Institute for Energy
Oh my
Studies
gosh,
hat.
fantastic.
You're one of a very select few that has it.
That is really a real treat. Thank
Not
you,
available in
Monica.
any store.
Not available in any store.
That is great, thanks.
And thanks so much for integrating your talk with the program.